Hello, it's Sunday the 26th of November 2023. Being a Sunday, I'm guessing that most people I know would be with their partner and their children, or be catching up with them for lunch, or going to swim with them, or just hanging around the house and taking in the paper or the news, or reading a good book, or chatting to them about their week or their plans for Christmas or their plans for the upcoming week, making an occasional joke, I would have hoped, or lots of them, playing some music and sharing their lives. So it's 11:15 in the morning, and this is the 11th month that I have sat every single day and night without my 11-year-old girl and my 14-year-old son. And so I would like to ask you a question genuinely. I genuinely want to ask you, what would you do if you hadn't seen your own little children for years? And I mean 4 months without a phone call. In 2021, after being stuck in a border closure with the first COVID-19, and hadn't seen them more than 3 times for 4 hours at lunch in that year. And if you had devoted your life and what you could have done with it for 20 years to raising them by yourself, what would you do? I mean, literally, what would you do? How would you feel? Because there are literally, to say literally again, 10 parents I know of who absolutely love their children and haven't seen them for years. Sorry about being baggy and crinkly and old now, but in the space of no time flat, that happened. Stress will kill you. And certainly grief, and certainly being alone. Your family and your friends and community are I think I wrote it the other day, the Africans have a word, Ubuntu. We exist in relation to other people. We're a pack animal. And it seems extraordinary to me that, and I mean, Labor is really starting to get the message. I just saw Chris Bowen on the Insiders program on ABC TV this morning, and it seems to get through. I mean, I contacted my local rep again this week and said, you cannot stand by Israel committing war crimes, no matter how many 1,500 families are suffering what I am suffering only for the last 5 weeks since Hamas did it to them, or just outright murdered them. And I guess like the only consolation, it is the only consolation, is that I have to know that they are not in a war zone on the outside, although they're definitely most likely to be in a war zone in their house, because it's a red flag, or should be to anybody, that the parent whose control they're under, someone whose friend, his friend, the parent, the father's friend, recently described him as treating my children like little slaves, quote unquote. And when he has a history of being ordered into anger management, having belted another stepson over the head till his nose bled, and that was like 25 years ago. So you either think that he's improved in that time, or being licensed to get away with murder, you could probably logically guess that it's got worse. And when he argues consistently, as my daughter said, with my son, who is his stepson, and has my daughter, and when I ran into my stepson, literally accidentally, 5 weeks ago now, he's destroyed. And this is what 10 parents I know are suffering. So it's not just about me. These are 10 people who you know, and they have talked to me privately to describe their pain and literally just said they were suicidal for 10 years. It's excruciating pain. I mean, so if you can turn on the news now and go, oh God, how horrific, they've stolen children, and we see all these Israelis, and it's only Israelis who are being shown pleading articulately in English their case to Australian media. The Australian media are almost wholesalely ignoring the monumental human rights violation and war crimes of Israel on the Palestinian children and mothers and fathers. If you can empathise with those people, how come you can't empathise with your own friend? Or so-called friend? Or acquaintance, if I'm just that to you? What would it take for you to sit down and imagine the horror? 24/7 horror of being kept from your children, barely getting through, if ever at all. This year it's been about 10 or 14 FaceTime calls. All year, from Christmas Day 2022. What would you actually do? And how would you actually be here and here and here? Would you, as people instruct to look after yourself, how, when your heart is broken, do you go about the day without the constancy of knowing and feeling the suffering of this deprivation? I mean, this level of grief, excuse me, this level of grief I say is impossible. I just don't think most human beings could endure it. But we know that so many women, particularly women around the world, have had to, because they have been shamed by male governed societies, literally made in my lifetime to go and repent for being impregnated by male ejaculate inside them, to priests in the front of church congregations, if unwed and unowned by a man in marriage. And all around the world stoned to death. Like that's what was going to happen to Mary. So Joseph, her so-called friend, and her found a manger to give birth to Jesus. A Sephardic Jew. So, again, what would you do? Would you write more letters? If you look at the other videos here, would you do what I've done? Just constantly chip away at the legal process and try to get a fair judge to have a look at this monumental miscarriage of justice, because even if you could get it happening, and it's this close to Christmas too, when everything shuts down. And you saw what happened the other day, put on the national contravention list for court orders and just dismissed after 3 hours. And I saw and heard mothers and fathers alike. And I told you in the previous video, a mother sat there and she had 72 pages of violations of her husband. And of course, this is again because it's legal. Like, you are living in a country with the highest rates of stolen children on earth, Northern Territory and New South Wales. I'll say it again, number 1 and number 2 respectively, for stealing children from their mothers, and welfare agencies that you pay for. Doing it to the most vulnerable. Aboriginal women, usually, who can't afford anywhere to live and have been literally assaulted by men. So they take their children from them. But do you understand, like, at what part are you complicit in? I mean, I marched against the invasion by the United States of Iraq because it wasn't Iraqis flying the planes in 9/11. I marched. And I marched on International Women's Day. And I fundraised for the Jimmy Little Foundation. I was on the board of Women in Film and TV. And I rolled out national programs, and I compiled things and raised money. Now, as I said before in other videos, since I was 10 years of age, self-initiated for World Wildlife Fund back then. So this is not a merely self-interested project. Although I ask you, as a parent, how could you be any more interested? Because it's being interested in your children, who are part of yourself, literally. And 1,600 videos and photos at Instagram do not lie. They don't. And nor do the affidavits of everybody who knew me long term, nor my family daycare clients, because I was forced to run a childcare because childcare is so preposterously and gender discriminatingly expensive in Australia. It is expensive to the point where women will never be equal with men until or unless it is totally free. And why shouldn't it be? So I had professional childcare qualifications and a uni degree and property and references from my family. And I suffered this appalling moment of trauma where many things happened at once. So I had a nervous breakdown. So not only have I been not allowed to recover in a normal amount of time, and I think I might have mentioned before, I saw a piece from Helena Bonham Carter, whose hairstyle I'm not dissimilar from right here, right now, except I wouldn't mind having her money and looks and career. That would have been nice. What a life. And she said her mother had a total nervous breakdown and it took her 4 years to recover. But she had money, like extreme amounts of it. Helena Bonham Carter's grandfather was a British Prime Minister, I believe, or in the cabinet, one or the other. And her mother was a very wealthy Jewish heiress, and she was flanked by love, and her children and her partner and her family did not abandon her, and they most certainly were not taken from her. So why pretend to care about mental health if mental health, in this case as it is a result of accumulated traumas and being litigated against constantly and suffering murders? You know, it literally, as I told you, my mother's stepbrother, just after my mother died, while I'm bleeding nearly to death and I lose my house to pay for it, and then can't afford a lawyer, so stand and self-defend in that context, look ever so slightly emotional. We get the wrong judge. She halves the trial dates, doesn't allow me to get updated affidavits from the father's ex-wife, whose coccyx bone was chipped, and who abused her constantly, verbally and emotionally, as she wrote. And so the judge idiotically rules it out. Leanne Turner rules it out. I complained so hard for 1.5 years while I'm shaking from losing my daughters and my house and my womb and my mother and this murder. And I'm shaking and complaining at the same time articulately enough to the system to get her fired off our case. But by the time we get the right judge, Dale Kemp, put back on, Federal Magistrate Dale Kemp, who's currently on leave, put back on, I've literally had a nervous breakdown and spent 4 weeks incarcerated against my will because they've falsely diagnosed me. And that's been overruled by 4 subsequent psychiatrists and psychologists. So then the final knife goes in to take my child because my family were all fighting, so I didn't call them to come pick him up. And that's the only way they got my son. I didn't harm him. I didn't harm my daughters. And then they give him to a man who's harmed everybody he's been with. This is the state of New South Wales under Natasha McLaren-Jones and her 2IC at the time, Michael Coates-Trotter, who was on the record saying he would do everything in his power to restore facts, that is, family and community services would do everything in their power to restore children to their parents, but they were doing nothing at all in my case. I was bashing on their door in letters and then stuck in border closures, and then rock up to the court and it's like, oh, your psychiatrist notes saying that they were wrong, they should never have put you in hospital for this misdiagnosis. They're out of date now anyway, saying that you're getting better, all alone, Uber driving some shit job for a living, just trying to stay alive with the hope that you get your children back. How would you be? How would you be? Here and here, how would you be? And what would you do? I mean, I can't bullshit myself enough to believe there's any God. So prayer is useless, as we know. And bad things happen to good people every single day. Just look at Gaza and look at Israel and look at the entire world. Look at the Taliban and women, and look at Iran. This hatred, this international misogyny and hatred of women run by male governments and male religions. But we're in Australia, so we're not meant to let this happen, right? It's a democracy. And by the way, I just saw some commentator on, as a total dive off from that, just an excursion sideways for a moment, now I am remembered. I've forgotten the name of the journal. It's a real shame. I think it was Richmond from the Sun Herald. It's pardon me, snivelling, literally, snotting. On today's Insider program, Sunday the 26th of November, 2023, and he was saying about, God, I hate that. Sorry, it just keeps happening. I can't get rid of it. It was like so many things. With the black joke of all except losing the very people I love, obviously there. I can just hear the note of a certain friend resounding as I said that. Very black humour. And he was saying to David Spears, the lead journalist of the program, that, well, of course, if the government was going to spend all this money on this upcoming contracts for gas and or for nuclear, of course, we'd obviously want to see where all that money's being spent before we approved it. And I just thought, no, you wouldn't. You've got no idea. Like, you are one of the country's most leading journalists, because you're on this program, and you have no idea about commercial in confidence clauses at all, because all government procurement contracts, where they buy any goods and services at all, if you don't know what that means, they just go procure something, anything, a submarine, a piece of paper to write on, a computer, their network, everything. Welfare farm out supervisors in all states and territories to Christian organisations, with people who've had 2 days training to come and supervise university-educated childcare professionals like me, watching their own children. When by rights, if this calamity hadn't happened outside of me that I could not control, literally, deaths and murders and bleeding losses and inside of my womb and house losses and all these things, like I literally would have been teaching or could have been teaching one of those courses. And they've got no idea that these Anglican and other Christian services are paid by DCJ New South Wales and by other welfare agencies in Australia, and so are all local council procurement contracts and state government, so local government, state and federal, all are allowed by our law currently right now to have commercial in confidence clauses built into them, where the very providers of these goods and services write in clauses into their contracts saying, and it is on condition that we don't have to tell anybody what we are being paid by the taxpayer. So I'm sorry, the Sun Herald journalist that was on Insiders this morning. As I said to Rob Stokes for 25 minutes-ish in 2001, 22 years ago, as a 30-year-old, I'm saying, do you understand that that literally means is against the very fundament of democracy, which is transparency of where tax goes? French Revolution, oh, our tax is going over to those rich people building a gold-lined castle. Oh, well, round up everyone, we're sick of this, cut off their heads. That's how democracy started, cutting off the heads of people who were taking tax and doing shit with it that they shouldn't have been, lining their greedy pockets instead of providing for the public, for the common weal, for the commonwealth, for the common good. So your dollars are being used to deprive me of my child and to put supervisors who've had 2 days training in the case of DCJ New South Wales, 2 days, little intensive course. Some of the supervisors, because I always asked every single supervisor who was put on me for 2 years, twice a week, 2 hours each time, so it's 400 hours. Again, in case you haven't seen any of these other videos. When I had the breakdown and they decided that I was the problem, not all the circumstances around me. Falsely diagnosed. By the way, I'm suing them currently. That's underfoot. That's under train. They're being sued. They did that, and your taxpayer money is being paid. Hi, Mike Warner. Your taxpayer money right now all over Australia, literally for every government procurement process, local government, state and federal, have commercial in confidence clauses built in, which means that you literally cannot see where your tax is going. At all. That's a commercial in confidence. It's a commercial contract. We're going to make money out of it, so we're not going to tell anybody who asks where the money's being spent. And yet you turn on the Insiders program this morning and you hear one of Australia's eminent journalists from the Sun Herald, although I don't credit that as eminent, but he was making reasonable arguments about everything else, saying, well, if we were going to invest in these coal gas projects or anything nuclear, of course we'd want to see where the money was going. And I'm just looking at him going, you tool. Like, you are a journalist in Australia who has no idea, not even after the recent PricewaterhouseCoopers debacle, in Canberra, where we found out that they were simultaneously clients of the government, of our money, the federal government at the ATO money, as well as big corporations, so that one of the partners of the firm went and gave all their corporate clients the inside run onto how to structure things right now to avoid the upcoming changes to the tax laws so that they could get around paying tax. They could literally avoid tax. Like all the multinationals in Australia, like Google, like all the mining companies and Rio Tinto and BHP, who are all offshore companies, of course. Stealing and literally making profits for Gina Reinhardt off stolen Aboriginal land. I mean, it's just, this place is a shithole of democracy, if you want to look at it on proper metrics. And I believe that should be the technical term. It is a shithole of democracy if you want to look at the metrics, because you can't see where your tax is going by law. So unless or until Labor stands up, or come on, Teals, let's go. Let's get it, because of course, why shouldn't you be able to see where your tax money is going? Yes, French Revolution, chop off their heads. Our tax money is going to line the Palace of Versailles. Great, that's not good enough. There's no common weal. There's no commonwealth spread around for us. Not enough in that. So let's go chop off their heads. And they did. And there you go. Democracy. Voila. So why would you not be literally have that enshrined in the Constitution, enshrined in legislation? Now, it's insane. But I do digress, because to get back to the point, these contracts are paying literally to deprive the person you're listening to right now of her children, to have 2-day-long trained supervisors oversee me, who's got 4 years long-running childcare service because I couldn't afford childcare and left an abusive man, who's got nannying references for barristers in lockdown, perfectly glowing references looking after other people's children, and yet being turned up and forced and degraded and humiliated and re-traumatised by people who are provided by third-party paid procured Christian organisations, the worst, so-called do-gooders, and look what good they've done mostly. It's like about the only redeeming feature is their so-called good works, where they feed the homeless and shelter them. And that's kind of like it, you'd have to say, for Christianity in Australia, full stop. Yeah, because they're now operating these services that are taking your money and you can't even see, and they're giving these people, to get back to the point when I asked them, and I always ask them, oh yeah, how did you come to this position of being a supervisor for New South Wales welfare state and for the Christian organisation who taxpayer dollars are employing to supervise me with a university degree and 4 years running a childcare and professional nanny? Go over to my LinkedIn, type it in, you'll see. And that's not the film degree either, and that's not the music degree, and that's not all of the volunteer work. And that's certainly not my children's academic record over there either. 2 out of 3, top of the state. And so let me get this straight. You're an ex-cop, are you? You're an ex-cop, is that right? Sorry, someone just sent me a message. Oh, you're an ex-cop, and so you're just doing this now that you're sort of semi-retired. Oh, I see. And then I asked another woman, a Fijian lady, a woman from out at, Blacktown. Oh, I do this. I've got a couple of children and a husband, so he looks after them on the weekend. I get a bit more money. Like, great, wrong accent, but you get the gig. You get the drift. And then this absolute piece of work, Ashley Armstrong was her name, is social. She drove there in mummy and daddy's expensive car, literally from the North Shore up to the Northern Beaches to Mona Vale, and we just hated each other on site, and she had all the confirmation bias going. She'd read the notes, so she was going to find everything that DCJ/facts/docs, they rebrand every 5 years, the confirmation bias, when you basically perceive what the bias in your mind has already confirmed you're going to perceive, and that's like most of reality for most of us most of the time, so you can hardly blame her, but she's a social work student, right? So she's going, she started to criticise that I was trying to get my little boy interested in a poetry book of one of the classics. And he's up the top of the grade anyway, instead of the book that he initially pulled off the shelf, and this was recorded as Mother Rejects Child's Emotional Needs. I mean, just horseshit drivel. Like, I'm going to start reading some of them out because I subpoenaed them all. They didn't show me, of course, so I subpoenaed them through the New South Wales District Court because I'm suing DCJ and health, state health and the state welfare, because it's the combination. I mean, I don't know why just all single parents aren't taking a class action to sue for housing unaffordability. Why aren't we suing in class actions, the government, for whoever it is? And of course, the valid argument that Kate Washington made this week, and that Labor is definitely making as well in so many other departments, is they've had inherited a decade worth of shit fuckery from the LNP in terms of the disarray that so many parts of public spending are on. Infamously, had a Prime Minister who gave himself secretly, this is a Christian who believes that a man with a dick lives in the clouds running the shit show on earth, gave himself swore himself into 5 portfolios. Fuck, unreal. It's like, how come he hasn't been prosecuted again, even just for that? Let alone Malcolm Turnbull and all of his buried money overseas. And so you step up to becoming a member of Parliament in Australia, and the first thing you got to do is register on your pecuniary interests. How much money you got, where it is, what your investment portfolio is, and shares, so you can make sure, so we can try and enact transparency so that you can't be seen to be making laws to benefit your pocket. Old boys networks aside, in the privatisation of all of our assets clearly notwithstanding. Pull the other one. Or just get your hand off tugging your own, because that's all you are doing, and we're an educated nation, so we can see it. Hence the Teals getting in and rolling the LNP, the no-elition, as someone else coined it, And I was so desperate this week, literally. This is how desperate I became. I phoned the LNP for the first time in my life after Rob Stokes, because he's LNP, but he was elected in a blue ribbon seat in the Northern Beaches, so I was obliged to talk to him, to point out to him that Pittwater Council and Warringah Council, because Pittwater shot off from Warringah years ago, before they all got re-amalgamated. Nothing like a bureaucracy to constantly fuck something up if it's working, right? I really shouldn't swear so much in these things. Maybe they'd have a better chance of getting to air than somewhere other than the internet. But, and all of these people just had no training whatsoever. And I think I've told you in other videos as well. One day, one of them turned up. This is a supervisor, a third-party procured New South Wales state government supervisor for me with all of my experience. Go to LinkedIn and, like I said, look at the other videos. Sorry about the bra, but can't help it. Don't care. And this woman had like multiple facial piercings, like all around here and down her nose, and then on the neck she had a right-wing tattoo. Like she had what's that Eureka Stockade one with the stars and the blur, and it's like it's a shorthand, literally icon. What icon really means is iconic. It was a literal depiction, a photograph, not a legendary person. It was an icon of the flag but it's a shorthand indicator of right-wing movements around Australia. And she's standing there and she sits there like the bogan that she is, chewing gum and typing into the phone. I've taken the kids to the MCA down at Circular Quay, the Museum of Contemporary Art. Then we've decanted to an expensive lunch. I can't lie there and laugh and cuddle them and read them a book like you would in your own house. So they're keeping them from actually having a proper, normal, legitimately intimate, loving relationship. So they're depriving my children. And I see my children walk off, and it's only meant to be one child, but the father's gone, oh, this is piss easy. Now we'll just keep the other one because, she's in the clutches of DCJ for the boy after the nervous breakdown that I caused her or helped to substantially by taking her 5-year-old from her as her mother died, and she lost her reproductive system and her rainforest home to pay for it, to save her life. And I relieved her of her 5-year-old. She's a total nervous breakdown. DCJ takes the boy. My own sister tries to give him away. She's loaded. I mean, it kind of almost, the theory, not the theory, but the research actually, in recently, like last 10 years, modern democracies is that there's continuums, on the line of you will get Trump voters on continuums because they tend to believe this and this about other issues. And they tend to believe if you're on the continuum of being a Labor voter or a Teal voter in Australia, you tend to believe a certain pattern of beliefs and behaviours about other issues related to why you're voting for any particularly given party. So these people are on the continuum of sorry, I just had the point, the continuum. So I think I lost my track there. I'll get back to the quality of supervisors. They don't have any quality. It's just a 2-day training course for anyone interested in making $50 an hour. There's a gig if you're broke on the side. Yeah. And so you do a 2-day training course and you rock up and you take notes. And so they're sitting at the MCA at a restaurant in the rocks of Sydney, can't cuddle them, can't take them home, can't, go and can cuddle them out in public, but you're not going to be able to, it's not the same as lying there holding your child and reading them a book and laughing and giggling and looking at their photos from that week or whatever they want to show you or tell you. It's not the same. It's not intimacy. It's in a public place. So there's no public, so the public-private divide, you're not going to ever get any private time again. And, of course, that is just what is so essential getting back to Sunday and any other day of the night and week for a mother. Or father, of course, who loves their children. And I've rung them up, I told you in previous broadcasts, and because I'm on their radar so much, because I'm banging on doors, I literally attended 52 Martin Place 3 weeks ago to speak to Jodie Harrison, the New South Wales Minister for Women. Never got a call back. I worked out from LinkedIn who all of her policy, who some of her policy advisors were, Joanne Gow, people like this. And then it's just completely stonewalled from Minister Washington, Kate Washington's office. This is Labor, by the way. And because I'm on their media department, I'm making broadcasts about you. You better answer some questions about my son because this is fucked. You've actually licensed a man who's literally on the police record having assaulted 3 other women. Over 25 years, every single female partner he's ever had. And I'm a childcare worker who owns property and has immaculate references from my family, my daycare clients, my nannying clients in lockdown where they were working from home, and a uni degree and I own property, and I haven't assaulted my last 3 partners. Yet you've given my child away to someone without property who has assaulted these last 3 partners and who hasn't run a childcare. So how do you figure that? And I'd like some answers, please, because I've got training as a journalist. That's my UTS film degree, is film media production and writing, And so, could you please answer? Clunk. We're not talking to you. You're an unreasonable complainant. Clunk. Oh, yeah, really? Am I? No, maybe I'm an accurate one. How about that? And how about maybe you're just avoiding what you can because, no one wants to be the poster girl or boy for losing one's kids. And, of course, the stigma to a welfare agency who are literally busy with Christian organisations gaming the system, and like the bludger, the Dennis Chapman, the lawyer who gets work for care and protection work through DCJ from Gosford, New South Wales, he was my son's direct legal representative for the last 5 years. My son told him for 3 years straight, from 2018 to 2021 inclusive, that he wished to be restored to his mother. Then they placed him with a man who hates my guts, has kept my children from me, as I explained before, while my mother died and I'm bleeding and all this horror, and then my godfather, mum's stepbrother, murders his wife at 68 years of age after 45 years of marriage. I'm in hell on earth, and goes, excellent, I'll take that, and takes, literally, like Hector Lanham, the cannibal, Hector, whatever his, Jodie Foster's great film is, and what's his name, and eats me alive. And so the welfare state and your money is over because tax is not hypothecated. Look it up. We get tax from all of those privatised roadways that your money bought and we sold to our old boy mates who are investors on these roadways that are the biggest cash cows in Australia. And we should have owned them because they're our public roads. Marx was right. Don't privatise your ports. Don't privatise your roads. Don't sell your assets like Telstra and infrastructure. Don't sell your banks. Karl Marx was bloody well right. Look at Singapore, one of the wealthiest nation states on earth. And I'm not advocating their social policy, I'm advocating their economic policy. They are one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, on earth. And they did exactly what Karl Marx instructed, okay? So, don't give me bullshit, or anyone else, bullshit arguments against Marxism. He was right by virtue of played out 200-year-long facts of economic metrics that are bona fide. So your non-hypothecated tax it's not corralled, so you go through a road toll or buy a packet of cigarettes or fuel, and the government takes massive amounts of tax from each of those purchases. They don't just go, great, well, we got all this tax from petrol, so we're going to go spend it on roads. No, it just goes into general consolidated revenue, right? So it's not hypothecated, it's not cordoned off and spent on the area from which it's generated. Tax is not, right? We know this. And then under our system of federalism. But yet it's still completely legal in this country to write PPPs, public-private partnerships, or any procurement contract involving public money on any level, 3 tiers of government, local, state, or federal. And these for-profit companies are right, and not-for-profits, but the for-profit ones, the biggest problem, writing contracts where they have commercial in confidence clauses, so they don't even have to tell a journalist what they are earning. So what the what our money is being spent on their profits, or the conditions for which those profits are being generated, in which those profits are being generated. So that is just patently absurd. Like game one, every politician in Australia, note one, let's, right there, pen through it. If you want to change climate change and you're talking about offshore gas exploitation, and the LNP screwed that up as well. Again, this bullshit lie that they can manage the economy better than Labor. Horse shit. They ran more debt before they paid for JobSeeker and JobKeeper under as lest we forget. They'd run up 3 times the debt that they'd spent 10 years breaking Labor's balls about. Oh, you're in debt. Well, you can afford to run a certain amount of public debt if you're investing in public infrastructure. Public money can borrow at 2% as opposed to private money borrowing to build a hospital or a road at 4%. So why wouldn't you do that? If you've got enough in the kitty, in the coffers. So all of these horseshit lies that the LNP constantly tell about them being better managers of the economy, just patently untrue, because they literally ran up 3 times the national debt before COVID number 1 hit in late March and early April, 2020. Before they were paying everybody through COVID, just not contractors or artists or musicians or anybody who worked for themselves, just like lots and lots of people. Unreal. Just Harvey Norman, never paid it back. So look, I'll go back to the top. It's a nation of human rights abusers. And then you've got this horrible, nasty little, just had the Insiders program on Sunday, 26th of November 2023, just to let you know again. And then you've got this nasty conversation about how it's going to have to be a race to the bottom because Labor's going to have to come out now that there's a war and everyone fleeing again, trying to get to safe shores where they could get a chance of a life with a country like Australia. And the very, very most petrified, terrified, traumatised people on earth doing anything they can, fleeing desperately, usually without documentation. It's like, oh, they're queue jumpers. No, they didn't even have documents. Oh, well, the other people sat in a refugee camp for 20 years before they got in. Like, yeah, you came here on a boat with all your ancestors, you hypocritical white fuckwit. How about you boat people? The whole bullshit 9 yards. You're constantly sold. I mean, I've voted Labor all my life. I changed when my mum died. I said these in other broadcasts. I vote for the Voluntary Euthanasia Party now. And good on Andrew Denton. This week in New South Wales, on the 28th of November, Tuesday, the New South Wales laws come in for voluntary assisted dying. And now it's only, ironically, Northern Territory and Canberra and ACT, the territories who don't have that legislation legalised now. And ironically, because, of course, Northern Territory was the first place on earth. And then it got rolled right back again under the so-called Christians who'd put a dog out of their misery but wouldn't do it for a person. It just... Peter Dutton's stupid... there you go, that reminds me as well. So a stoop to phoning the LNP this week and said, look, I've given up on caring anymore whether it's Labor fighting the Greens and Greens fighting Labor, because if they were rolled together in a coalition under the Labor Green Party, the LGP, the LNP would never get up again. They would never get up again because they don't have the numbers on the primary counts. Greens are pulling 14% in many places, not just the cities, but they're pulling anywhere between 9, 10 and 14, and then down in Melbourne, of course, winning. And so the Greens have got massive votes coming up. Labor's usually had at least, a bare minimum of 33 at its worst, wasn't it? 33% roughly. And then usually tracking somewhere around 45 nationally. Well, stick those two figures together, you got 58, haven't you? Percent. So the LNP would never get in. How about you stop your bullshit fighting and make sure that you can make a coalition of the LGP just so that you could keep this country safe from putting the aunt back into country. You from those people ever again. Keep them safe from economic mismanagers. Keep them safe from liars who say that they're liberal when they're not liberal at all. They're conservative. Keep them safe from people who mismanage the economy. Keep them safe from people who would put a man into the portfolio as the Minister for Women. Keep them safe from people who would get rid of their best man, Julie Bishop. Keep them safe from liars who believe that there's a man with a cock between his legs in the clouds running Earth. Scott Morrison. Keep them safe. That is what makes a democracy, the separation of religion from it. In fact, go further. Legislate that if you do believe it's something that idiotic, we're not America. We've got no Bill of Rights, so don't pretend that you've got some amazing right to practice religion and then start to infect public policy with it. It's meant to be separated in a democracy, right? Separation of powers. So make a law saying if you believe that somebody who is gendered with genitals lives in the clouds running the show on Earth, you're probably not really fit for office. How about that? While you're at it. But seriously, because you got religious people managed to make sure that they were running the shows in most places on Earth for most of the last 9,000 years, the Abrahamics at least, in the West, and everywhere else too, that aren't the Abrahamic religions. So all male dominated though, aren't they? With the exception of Kali, isn't it? Hindu. Apparently the dead head in one of her 8 arms is not a man, it's a demon. So yeah, slay the LNP demon, But slay people who would take children from mothers, because they're doing it on Earth, in this country, at the highest rates per capita on Earth. The Northern Territory, number 1, New South Wales, number 2, and they're the most vulnerable women. Aboriginal women who cannot afford housing, and 2 people with a job can't. It's well known there's a national housing crisis on. So Aboriginal women who've been assaulted, usually by men, and overwhelmingly usually by men, and they're single mothers and they've got nowhere to live. And so they couch surfed for 2 years. One was on the TV the other week. So welfare just came along and took her children from her. How about just coming along and giving her a fucking house? How about that? I mean, there's imagine all the profits that were made from the privatisation of public assets in Australia literally could have paid for the housing. And the fantastic book about the GFC back in 2008 called Griftopia had the figure in it that the amount of public money that was spent bailing out private American banks on Wall Street literally could have paid off every existing mortgage in the United States at that time. And imagine what that would have done for, well, not for the bank's profit, obviously. They might have had to get reasonable about their credit card interest rates and what they charged you to keep a bank account, even as a pensioner in Australia, $5 a month. Wealthiest banking sector on earth, again, while we're at it. Out of control, unregulated. I mean, ASIC's meant to be regulating this stuff. Australia is defined by the biggest theft of children on earth per capita from their parents, and those parents are usually vulnerable, assaulted Aboriginal women. The biggest, most per capita successful private for-profit banking sector on earth. The biggest human rights abuses of the most vulnerable people, billions of dollars spent to private companies like Serco or Broad Spectrum, which was Transfield rebranded, I believe. Our money, all with commercial in confidence clauses inbuilt into those contracts so that we cannot see how much they're making and what they have to do to get it and on what terms they're getting it. Absolutely against the fundament of democracy. So, I try to keep the intellectual content involved to try to describe how these structures are feeding into my particular situation. But at the end of the day, the bereavement of a mother who's lost her children, and who any parent, and again, so it's 10 people I know in a cohort that Facebook and Zuckerberg and his marketing machine tell me. I have 650 acquaintances and friends who apparently care about Israel stealing Hamas stealing Israelis, and apparently should care about right-wing male governments in Israel war criming, murdering people through the Gaza Strip, and who should and are meant to care about Russian Putin armies thieving Ukrainian children to demoralise and destroy the parents in that country and put the fear of God into them, or the fear of Putin, who thinks he's the same thing. So you can see it outside of your country, but like all human beings with their blinkers on, you just can't see it inside your country. But we're the biggest abusers of it on earth. How? I guess if it's not really perfectly clear by now, I am begging you to help me. To get my children restored to me for the sake of the proper carriage of justice. And all of these videos here that I've taken to doing because I've exhausted the legal, not quite exhausted, I haven't quite exhausted the legal process. I sat in the queue as yesterday's video described, and I explained all that, so I won't cover it off again. But it's back to the drawing board for the wrong cover sheet. It's not like the content mattered. They just went, it's the wrong form, state of, it's illegal. So you've got to, do it the correct way to make it legal process, comply with the legal process. I get that. Can't just have a willy-nilly here's a piece of paper, and then but they had literally listed it in the contravention order list and then just dismissed it after 10 minutes. Very competent submissions, Ms. Farrow-Pryke. And these, I heard desperate parent after desperate parent, which brings me back to, if there are 10 people in my meta cohort of 650 friends, that's 1.5% roughly, and these are some of the nicest people in some of the best industries in Australia, Lovely, kind, loving fathers, mainly, 7 of them, and 3 mothers. And no one wants to be the poster girl or boy for losing your children, and the stigma and the humiliation and the pain is so much that no one wants to go and talk about it because everybody believes you must have hurt them. I did not. Go to my Instagram. Again, I normally top and tail it with please go to my Instagram feed, type my name in. Those videos and those photos don't lie. So how could you ever keep living through the dispossession of your own children? What are you meant to do? And as I've said a couple of times here in these videos before, in some ways, because I've spent a lot of my life just literally wondering what 65,000 years of human beings would have been doing in each various part, whether it was the Daintree I visited or the Hawkesbury River on which I grew up, or, you know, Balmoral. It's so much, the Aboriginals who had all the ocean, the saltwater people here would have had so much more bounty in terms of available seafood and fish, and everything would have been so different to being in the arid desert. Snakes and other things to catch and completely different ways of doing it. There are 300 different nations here, all with their different languages and different cultural practices. And in so many ways, Australia deserves to have just lost the most ancient culture and all of its incredible wealth of knowledge of 65,000 years. Medicines and ritual beliefs, and just out of the curiosity of how human beings survived in this so diverse a country with snow and rainforest reefs and everything, and beaches and deserts and Tasmania, everywhere. Tasmania, which apparently didn't break off from Australia, it sailed around from somewhere else. They've just recently discovered, I think it's near Argentina, in all the tectonic moves. I mean, this massive nation that has so many different human beings and the ways they would have had to survive and deal with the land and all the knowledges of the medicine, and it's just lost. And we looking at what we, the collective everybody, but particularly white Australia and its policies have done to Aboriginal parents. I sometimes feel like, because I cared for the land so much in some ways, I feel like it has exacted the same toll on me. I mean, this is my only imagined spirituality that I have left available to me. It's most certainly not a god of any description with genitals. It's the entire universe and our carbon-based life form's evolution. I get that. But in some ways, if you do believe in that kind of magic, and I never have or did till the 10th of September 2018, go look at Instagram, Ticking Painting it's called, and I filmed it and there were 3 witnesses. Still can't explain that. But that's the day they scheduled me as well. Didn't even look at the video, called me psychotic. I'm like, no, actually look at the video. My son's talking, and then his artwork is framed on the wall. It stops ticking. There's a ticking sound coming from it, and clearly I've moved the camera right up to it, and you can see where it's coming from. Then he stops talking, and the ticking stops, and then he starts talking, the ticking stops. He stops talking, the ticking starts. And that scared the shit out of me. 166 beats per minute. They found me panting and vomiting because my mum on a deathbed said that she would move a painting if there was something on the other side. And the nurse I was living with, the registered nurse, Madison Van Heeren was her name. She came in from an overnight shift at Gosford Hospital, and her jaw dropped. And my son was standing there seeing it too, and I've got it on video. They didn't even look at it and just scheduled me. It's like psychotic. So no, they're not. Everyone else has said, no, she's not. Just she had this weird thing and then all of this stress. And in some ways, you know, the Kadaicha man, the spirit, so many Aboriginal people believe there's spirits in the land, and that's how you get pregnant. The spirit comes up through you, and you're a vehicle of the land. You grew up from it, as we literally did, as we know we have grown up from the earth. In some ways, I feel one of the only ways of trying to rationalise this to myself is I've had so much empathy, or tried to imagine, and given my heart and my mind to the earth and the people who are here, who own it. They're not the traditional owners, they're the actual owners. Can we get a grip on that too? Take your hand off it, Australia. It's their land. They never conceded it, and you stole it under your own law in 1788, so don't fucking lie. They're not the traditional owners, they are the owners. So it feels like it's taken its toll. It feels like this country has paid me back for the same love and care that so many Aboriginal people for 65,000 years, whose children we stole, here comes my flatmate, I'm going to go, it's taken from me in the same way that they were taken. G'day, Neville. Just finishing off a broadcast. I'll see you later. Please go to my Instagram. Please go to my GoFundMe page, and more importantly, put this up to newsmakers, journalists and producers, please. Thank you.